Well, hey everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 299 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds, and today, nerd away we shall. You guys have heard of bootleg records, yeah? I mean, these are the underground records that were released without any permission or control of the artist or record label. And often these bootleg records were live concert recordings made without the permission of artists and generally quite secretive people sneaking recording equipment into concert halls with risk of potentially great peril to themselves and their gear. And sometimes bootleg records were unauthorized releases of artist demos or outtakes, music that was never meant to be heard by the public, and the bootleggers somehow got their hands on these recordings, privately pressed up some vinyl, and put the profits into their pockets, not those of the artist or label. Now, many of these bootleg recordings, just by their nature, were pretty poor quality, and some of them are quite tough to enjoy. However, the company known most for high-quality bootleg records throughout the 70s was TMoQ, or Trademark of Quality. And there's a phenomenal new book out on the history of this record label, complete with pictures of pressings and vinyl and packaging. The book is called A Pig's Tale, the underground story of the legendary bootleg record label. Now, A Pig's Tale is put out by Genius Publishing, and wow, it is gorgeous and fascinating, and I highly recommend checking one out for yourself at tmqapigstale.com. Now, in today's show, we talk to the authors of that book on the story of Trademark of Quality, the start of the label, the original Great White Wonder Bob Dylan bootleg, the risks of running a bootleg vinyl operation, the cash-only nature of the business, it's very much under the radar of police, FBI, and other agencies, the overages from organized crime, and many unique characters and situations that the people from Trademark of Quality found themselves in. And we also talk about the actual records themselves, which have become extraordinarily collectible in recent years, some fetching thousands of dollars when they come up for sale. You may recall in episode 294 of the Vinyl Guide when we spoke to Ross Halfin about Led Zeppelin bootlegs, and he and even Jimmy Page are always on the hunt for these unique records, and the top of the list of desirable bootlegs is always records from Trademark of Quality, a label not just run by entrepreneurs, but also audio and music fanatics who wanted to present only the best quality recordings to people who purchase TMoQ. I think you guys are really going to enjoy today's conversation and even more so the book, so I highly recommend picking up a copy, especially if you're a record nerd. It's an absolutely gorgeous and fascinating read. Now, today I have a few shout-outs on the show. First off, new show supporters from patreon.com/vinylguide. I'm talking you, Jim Van, John Walling, Scott, Andrew Mills, Paul Van Inns, Ian Wobble, Ray. You guys absolutely rock. Thank you so much for supporting the show, and I hope you're enjoying all the extras up at patreon.com/vinylguide, and I encourage all the others to follow their lead. It's always a big help for a show like ours. Also, I wanted to give a shout out to Blue Note Records, who recently unearthed some additional Lee Morgan Live at the Lighthouse vinyl box sets. It's a 12 LP box set, and it had originally sold out, but apparently they found some extras, posted them online, and I was able to grab one. So if you're still looking for a copy, check up there at Blue Note Records website. You may be able to still grab one. Finally, I want to give a huge thanks to Tom Scholes and the Boston Band Management for not only providing some time for a very rare interview with Tom on episodes 297 and 298, but also for sharing all the episodes across their socials and just generally being great to work with. It was fantastic to be able to talk to Tom, and if you haven't heard those episodes, go back and check them out. And also don't forget to subscribe or follow the Vinyl Guide on your podcast app because episode number 300 is coming up quick. All right, there we go. The upfronts are done. Let's settle into our conversation all about bootleg records and the Trademark of Quality record label with Ralph Sutherland and Harold Sherrick, authors of the book A Pig's Tale, the underground story of the legendary bootleg record label, and a book I would consider an absolute must-read. It's fascinating, a detailed story with tons of full-color pictures of all the records, artwork, and even the master tapes. And again, you can pick up the book at tmqapigstail.com. So there we go. Let's talk TMoQ bootleg vinyl with Ralph and Harold. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this week on the Vinyl Guide, we're going to be talking to a couple of gentlemen who have just created this book, A Pig's Tale, the underground story of the legendary bootleg record label, Trademark of Quality, Mr. Ralph Sutherland and Harold Schierick. Gentlemen, welcome to the Vinyl Guide show. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
I got to tell you, I absolutely love this book. It's an amazing tribute to this record label that could really only have happened once and at that brief period of time. And it sounds like you guys were somewhat at the epicenter of this. For starters, what was your relationship with the Trademark of Quality record label?
Well, you want to take this, Harold?
Well, it started out, we were both working in record stores at the time. And this is where we met Pigman. When one of the first records appeared, which was the Bob Dylan Great White Wonder. Mm-hmm. Everybody was intrigued with that, and because it had never been, nothing like this had ever been done before, and people seeing this and finding out it was unissued, unreleased Bob Dylan, tapes that were pressed on a double vinyl record, white label. White, just a plain white cover, was pretty fascinating and caught everybody's attention. And this was our introduction to him. Mm-hmm. And this is where we started, we started becoming friends with Pigman. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the beginning.
So as you say, Pigman, now we're using some aliases here. In the book, there are some aliases for...
that's his real name was Pigman. No, just kidding. For the sake of the book, we call him Pigman. He was the main guy behind the motivation of TMoQ. Although when he started, his partner Carl, he and Carl were the ones who did Great White Wonder, who came up with the crazy idea to do it.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're still using aliases some 50 years later. Is there a statute of limitations? Like, what is the risk of being able to be more open? And I'm not saying for you, but for Pigman and Carl to be more open. Is there still a risk?
Well, not really. Our sources for this book, we have agreed to protect our sources, and their paranoia runs deep, as the song goes. So we have honored that, and we do protect our sources. So legally, there's probably not a realistic risk at this time. Mm-hmm. But the original culprits are, enjoy their life and their privacy. So we respect that.
Okay.
Yeah, they just want to remain anonymous, basically. So that's why the aliases are all through the book like that, because everybody just wants to, just lie back and just let us tell the story.
And that's how they agreed to give us access to their memories and access to the archives, mm-hmm. which we didn't know existed at the time. It just blew us away when we found out that the master tapes and there was a record archive and an archive with all the publications about this. We never knew that existed after all this time.
It's interesting in the book, and I'm going to jump to the end. Sure. At one part, there was a potential bust, and a lot of the materials were destroyed. Yet there was a record archive and tape archive, as is shown in the book you just discussed. Where was that?
Well, that was all hidden away from the feds. And basically what was destroyed were the album covers and the labels at the pressing plant, because the feds were coming with their search warrant. And that was what was most incriminating, was the printed matter. Because once that wasn't there, they couldn't prove anything. Other people had stuff there too, but I don't know what happened with them. Mm-hmm.
But there was stamps.
Other bootleggers.
There was the stamps for the covers, and there was all sorts of things.
Oh yeah, the stamps and the album jackets and the record labels, all that was removed like a day or two before the feds arrived with their search warrant. Actually, though, I have to say, at the time, Trademark Equality was not doing anything illegal criminally. There was the civil matter, you could be sued, but that was a civil matter. There were copyright laws that went into force later regarding so-called bootleg records, but TMoQ didn't do anything after 1976, and all the later laws have gone into effect since then.
Got it. Okay.
But the United States never signed on to the copyright laws of the Geneva Convention regarding sound recordings before that.
So this means that it really is just up to the judgment of the feds and the officers at the time as to whether what you're doing is illegal or not.
I mean, my research into this indicated that it was more of a political pressure from the record industry to get someone in Congress to pressure the Justice Department to get the FBI to investigate this. But in reality, if this ever would have gone to court, it probably would have been thrown out.
Okay. So let's get to the beginning. People may not be as familiar with the story. At the beginning, this started off as a limited 400 unit run of Bob Dylan's Great White Wonder, or what became known as the Great White Wonder.
Right.
It didn't have a name even at the very beginning.
No, it wasn't Bob Dylan. It was Great White Wonder. Yeah. Seriously, if Trademark Equality would have not used the real artist names and continued doing that, they probably would have been even safer than they were legally.
Mm-hmm. So,
everybody knew who Great White Wonder was.
What was the first TMoQ record that actually had an artist name on the front?
Well, it was the Frank Zappa 200 Motels.
Okay.
Which was recorded at the Poly Pavilion at UCLA in Los Angeles with the Mothers of Invention, Zubin Mehta, and the LA Philharmonic. That was the first official TMoQ, which was done in the latter part of 1970.
So going back to the Great White Wonder, this first press of 400 units, how quickly did that sell out?
Probably, I'd say about 6 weeks, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Between 1 and 2 months, I say that was gone.
And from what I understand, that record went into multiple represses. Any idea of the quantity that were eventually pressed of that?
No one will ever know that. No, there was. I think the second pressing, as near as we can tell, was about 1,000, and there was another couple of thousand pressed. But by that time, other people were copying it, and who knows how many of those are. I'm sure it would have gone platinum had we had a real count on it.
Mm-hmm. Did Pigman and Carl know that it was illegal right away? Did they understand kind of the waters they were sailing into?
No, not at all. From what they told us, no, they had no idea what was going to happen or the legalities. They did get legal advice about it later, but at the time they were just having a good time. They were just music freaks and collectors that thought, let's make our own Dylan album because we don't like Nashville Skyline that much, so we'll make our own album of earlier Dylan stuff.
I can imagine all these people out there making their own albums because they don't like what the artist just released. Boy,
well, that's what was behind it. I mean, it wasn't about money; it was about we'll make our own record.
But even at the very beginning, again, not questioning the motive here, but even at the very beginning, they knew to keep themselves at arm's length, not putting the artist's name on.
The story behind them, the Greek, as he's called in the book, the money man, was paranoid. So he was telling them to be cool about this whole thing. And, in the story, you could see how it transpired, how it came together. Mm-hmm. You couldn't make this up.
No. So the one thing I was unclear about is some of the early releases on this label had record labels like Rakilian Records, Dupree and His Miracle Sound Volume 1.
Right.
Were those willful, deceptive tactics, or were they truly labels left over from the record pressing plant?
I'm not sure about that. I think the pressing plant Carl had those pressed at some plant, and he just said, just make up a label. And the guy at the pressing plant made up this label. I don't know if they were left over or if he made those up. I'm not sure, because most of them were all white labels on the original Great White Wonder.
All right, so there's still a bit of a question as to whether there was actually a Lurch Records somewhere else that just had an overrun.
Well, the instigator of Liver was Hans, and he's the one who picked the name of that label.
Okay.
And then there was a second pressing on Oakland Records. So,
okay, all right. So I'm going to assume that was a.
We're referring to the Rolling Stones' "Liver Than You'll Ever Be."
Yeah,
which came later in 1969.
Now, would the current legal situation allow us to talk about the record pressing plants? Who was doing the pressing?
We can't. We shouldn't reveal the actual name. I mean, it probably doesn't matter. They're probably not around anymore, but I don't feel comfortable revealing any real names right now.
Right.
Yeah. In the book, things kind of bounce back and forth based on the subject we're talking about. Like there's one chapter about the legality, and there's one chapter about being a sneaky recording engineer going into concerts. And then there's some crazy stories about, wise guys with expensive suits. And
let's talk about that. What sort of pressure or involvement did Pigman and Carl have with that sort of crowd?
Well, as things became, there was money coming up. This is later. This isn't at the beginning, but later people were making money from this. And it turns out that there were certain people in the East that were interested in any kind of entrepreneurial money-making scheme. So their representatives in the LA area approached us a couple of times about becoming partners with them. And Carl and Pigman were not comfortable with that at all. So they avoided that. But, because sometimes you get in business with people you can't get out of later. So
I read the story of the potential involvement in the book.
Yeah.
You guys were able to get beyond that. Was that a singular incident, or did the wise guys continue to stay in the picture in one way or another?
There were a couple of instances where there was a pretty blatant invitation to join them in their business interests, but I mean, I think they were involved in the distribution of Liver in particular. There was some distribution going on because Liver was actually released in Chicago, even though it was produced in Los Angeles. And it was distributed from there. And that wasn't Carl and Pigman doing that.
Right.
The records were being shipped back there, lots of them.
Let's talk a little bit about how the recordings were obtained. So Great White Wonder was assembled from, I'll say, fan collecting tapes that were circulating.
Yeah, just reel-to-reel tapes that were being passed around by collectors. Some of it, I think, Pigman recorded some of it off of a radio broadcast, and then Carl had some tapes of unreleased Dylan, and between the two of them, they had enough to do the double Great White Wonder. I mean, they had more material, but they debated and decided what to put on 2 LPs on 4 sides. But all that was third or fourth generation, at least, recordings.
Right.
Which is why it didn't sound, like a commercial album, of course. But the collectors didn't care.
Right.
They were just so happy to get it.
And they took the leap from assembling an album from tapes that they had and sourced from different places to then recording the live concerts themselves.
Well, that started with Liver Than You'll Ever Be, the Rolling Stones.
Was there much in between Great White Wonder and Liver?
Oh, you mean albums?
Yeah.
Oh, there was Stealin', which was a Dylan album.
Another
there was
Dylan.
John Birch Society. There was, let me see here. There was the Beatles, Whiskey Flat.
Because I thought Liver was the third, as I understand. And it was all Dylan before that.
Let me see here. I'll tell you. There was John Birch Society. There was
Stealin'.
Yeah. Yeah, John Birch and Stealin' were the two Dylan albums.
Okay.
Although there was My God, Jethro Tull, there was a Donovan Reedy River.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a few things before Liver. But Liver, of course, was the big breakthrough live recording.
And at that point, Liver, this is 1970 Rolling Stones?
1969, November 1969.
Okay. And at that point in time, people could rock right into a live concert with a tape recorder.
Oh, sure.
Large cameras. Security wouldn't bat an eye at that point.
No, there was no security for that at that time.
No.
Right.
You can actually thank Trademark Equality for all the guards standing at doors of entrances to concert halls now.
In the book, there was the story of the recording of that record was amongst about 6 different Rolling Stones shows that they traveled around. Okay.
There were 2 in Los Angeles at the Forum. There were 2 at Oakland near San Francisco. There was 1 in San Diego, and there was 1 in Phoenix, Arizona.
What happened with the rest of those tapes of the material that didn't make it to the Liver album?
It's still around.
Okay.
It's still in the archives, the source tapes, the originals. Part of the later, the San Diego show was released as an album called Stone Aged. Much later. Okay.
So I believe there was the story of towards the end of that Rolling Stones concert run, the 6 out of 6 show, whatever the last one was, where the Stones management or the promoter actually got wind of this recording and had a problem with it.
Oh, well, he saw the microphone from the stage and came running down, and Hans and he had a tug of war with this microphone. He was trying to take the microphone away, and Hans was holding on to it, and they were going back and forth. Meanwhile, Pigman made a run for the door with the tapes. And somehow Hans got the microphone and ran out another door. Yeah, that was a pretty wild event, evidently.
It seems like in the early 70s, especially with management like Led Zeppelin's Peter Grant, that recording a band gets you in extreme trouble, not legally necessarily, but physically as well. What other sort of run-ins did the team have in doing this sort of field recording?
Well, there was another one with the same guy, with Sam Cutler at the Palladium in 72, which the same thing happened again, where he spotted the microphone and they had to make a run for it. Yeah, that was pretty close. They were getting pretty rough there.
This is Rolling Stones or another?
Yeah, Rolling Stones at the Palladium in 72.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, was it difficult for the TMoQ team to get additional recordings? It looks like they just started having this run of great records.
No, not actually. From what we've been told, they were offered tapes all the time. After a while, people would get to them and say, "Oh, I've got a tape of this or a tape of that." So there was no problem getting material to release. The problem was getting material to release that was high enough quality to put on a TMoQ album.
Right.
Because Pigman was very picky about the sound and the performance and everything.
Okay.
There were other bootleg labels, of course, and some of them were just putting out all kinds of crap.
What other tactics did the TMoQ team do to get material?
Well, it was kind of a mixture of things. There were live recordings that were recorded, and then people would offer, unreleased outtakes or something, and then somebody would have a radio broadcast. And Pigman was always looking for live broadcasts to record. Like, for instance, when he recorded, it was a live broadcast of David Bowie at Santa Monica in 72 with Spiders from Mars. And he recorded it off the air live, FM and stereo, from an FM station in Los Angeles. And he ended up making 2 LPs from that concert, which were amazing, which by the way, got released several years ago by David Bowie himself, finally, on CD.
And there was this story in the book about a person who had access to a lot of material that didn't want to share the material necessarily for publication, but played the material.
Oh, the acetates. Yeah,
Yes.
That was the Mission Impossible story. Yeah.
Did you ever find out who is this guy? I'm assuming
I don't know. I don't have a name for him, but he was a Brit, and obviously he had access. He must have worked at some recording studios in London or something, because it seemed like he had access to these reference acetates. That what they would do in those days is they'd be in the studio, and rather than making a cassette, they would make an actual acetate, which is like a demo record. They would cut a little demo record there for the artist to take home and listen to. And this guy came to LA peddling these things because he wanted to make some money. One of the things he offered was the Live Cream, which was released on Atlantic Records later. And I was told he did offer that to Carl and Pigman for like 10 grand. But luckily they didn't. They thought it was too expensive, and luckily they didn't buy it, because I think that would have really created a shitstorm.
Right.
If that would have come out, and then Atlantic Records was going to release it.
Did they ever almost get material that was destined for legitimate distribution?
Oh, sure. A lot of the Dylan stuff has come out since then. Starting in 1991 with the Dylan.
No, but I mean immediately, like that Live Cream.
No, at the time, no, I don't think so.
Not at the time. Years later. So, for instance, the Beatles' Yellow Matter Custard was one of the earliest bootlegs of their BBC recordings. And obviously in '94 is when it came out legitimately, Volume 1, when they gathered up all that stuff from different collectors and different sources and whatever was left at the BBC, and they released Beatles Live at the BBC. But we had it out, years and years and years before.
Now, just finishing up this that story of this guy that's in the book named Trevor. He came from the UK with those acetates.
Right.
And he was persuaded to play those, but little did he know.
Yeah, well, the trick was to get him to play them. He was one of these guys that says, I have this and you can't have it. But he wanted you to appreciate how cool he was and that he had these rare recordings. So the challenge, that's why in the book it's called Mission Impossible. Carl and Pigman came up with a scheme to get him to play the disc for them, and not knowing that they're being recorded on tape while they're being played from the acetates. So they came up with a scheme to bring him up to where Pigman lived with his roommate, who was a big Rolling Stones fan. And Pigman set up recording equipment under the house. And that was all set up before Trevor arrived with Carl. And Carl, meanwhile, was feeding him as many joints as he could to get the guy stoned so he would lose track of time. And so they started playing all these acetates, and Pigman's roommate, Hans, who's the guy who came up with the idea for Liver, he was saying, "Oh, this is the really cool stuff, Trevor. I want to hear more." So they kept playing all these acetates. Meanwhile, Pigman's under the house with 2 Revox tape recorders recording it on 10-inch reels at 15 IPS. And they were there for hours doing this. And then finally they were done, and Carl told Trevor, he said, "Well, it's time to go." So he packed up his acetates and left. And Carl took him back to his hotel or whatever. But meanwhile, they got some amazing stuff. They got the Stones BBC stuff, and they got Dylan BBC, and they got what else? They got the
Pete Townsend.
They got the Pete Townsend, Genius of Pete Townsend album, which was the working tapes for Who's Next, and I mean, just amazing stuff. And even though it was from acetates, there were some ticks and pops. The sound was amazing on those masters. I mean, if anybody has those records, they're just astounding.
I love that story.
Yeah, I mean, it was really crazy.
Now, back in the day, did retailers get popped regularly for stocking bootlegs?
We'll be back after these messages.
Hey there, do you know who just got a ton of used records up for sale? audiophileUSA.com. They have over 42,000 titles in their online shop, all excellent and near mint condition. They do not screw around with records of mid-tier quality. Only the best vinyl makes it to audiophileUSA.com. So you know that when you buy from them, all your records will be of supreme quality. AudiophileUSA.com is family-owned and operated, high-quality stock, and they love music, the exact type of businesses we love to support. Just point your browser to AudiophileUSA.com, search, dig, and find the gold. That's AudiophileUSA.com, home of the Holy Grails. Oh yeah, and don't forget to wash your record grooves with the Groove Washer, the #1 vinyl record cleaner in the world. Bring out the best sound for your vinyl experience by using the Groove Washer before each play. Ask for the Groove Washer by name at your local record shop and accept no substitutes. Or if you can't make it to the store, go to groovewasher.com and use discount code VinylGuide10 at checkout and save on everything you buy. Don't wait, your vinyl experience will be immediately uplifted by using the Groove Washer. That's groovewasher.com, discount code VinylGuide10. Go now!
Now we return to the program already in progress.
No limits.
Back in the day, did retailers get popped regularly for stocking bootlegs?
They were harassed, but yeah, there were some later that they actually made seizures of some of the bootlegs, but they were given back because it wasn't illegal.
Mm.
The feds would confiscate them for a copyright infringement or something. And then a year or two later, they would have to give them back because they never were prosecuted. There were some people later. There was a guy in Florida that was doing Elvis bootlegs, and supposedly he went to jail.
Mm. Okay.
And there was one bootlegger in Orange County, and she lost a lot of her assets because she was bootlegging Bruce Springsteen, which was not a good idea. But this came later.
Right.
Pigman had left the scene by then, as had Carl. Well, Carl might have kept going, but Pigman was off the scene by then.
What precautions were taken to distance Pigman and Carl from the retail end of things?
Well, they had people who were distributing. I mean, there were people in Los Angeles who knew who they were, but people pretty much kept their mouths shut because they were making money. And, you know, it was kind of a cool thing to be involved with the bootleggers. So they didn't want to jeopardize that, the retailers. But I mean, we're talking about independent stores here. We're not talking about Tower Records or Warehouse, those people. Most of the independent stores, I mean, it was an underground thing. And that was part of the cachet of this, is people wanted this stuff because it was underground.
Mm-hmm.
It was cool to sell it and have it in your collection. It still is.
But I would imagine that if there was a federal agency or some sort of law enforcement that wanted to find out the source of these, it could be relatively easy to squeeze some of these retail shops who are kind of putting them in the racks to then find a pathway back to the TMoQ guys.
Well, that did happen with TMoQ. Somebody did rat, and it's in the book, the story. And Pigman decided at that point it was probably better to move on.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it was amazing. Most people wouldn't cooperate with the man, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Just reading the book, it seems that there were many potential areas for leaks. For example, there's the retail shops, there's the record pressing plants,
Mm-hmm.
there's the company that made the stamps, the pig stickers, even the Xerox inserts. It seems like the weakest link in that chain could have come back and shut down TMoQ.
Well, a lot of it was just plain luck, really was.
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, there's one part in there where Carl talks about picking up pressings at the pressing plant, and he would go at 5:30 in the morning to pick up his pressings. You know, when he and Pigman went their separate way, they were still making records at the same plant.
Mm-hmm.
And the pressing plant opened very early, so Carl would show up early at 5:30 to pick up his pressings. And they had people in suits parked across the street from the pressing plant, but they didn't come to work till 8:00. So if they would have come earlier, they would have found Carl loading his car up with stuff. But they
it was a simpler time.
Oh yeah. But the people investigating this obviously didn't know anything about the record business or the underground industry or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were pretty lame when it came to, if I was in charge, I would have figured this thing out probably within 72 hours.
The record company's response is very interesting in that they actually started using some of the same tactics to market their legitimate releases. Live at Leeds, Zappa,
yeah, well, that was
Fillmore.
Thanks to Who. That was kind of a tribute to the bootlegs. The Live at Leeds with the rubber stamp on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they had a handwritten label on that, the original pressing. It looked like it was written on, and then it says ticks are okay, which meant they put ticks and pops on the record to make it sound like a bootleg, which was hilarious.
Yeah, their tribute to us, to TMoQ.
Yeah. Now, did it become very difficult to, I guess, release a bootleg into a sea of, now you have the record companies duplicating it. There were other bootleggers. There were Rubber Dubber and Courtney Phone and then no name brands. Did it become difficult to achieve the sort of sales numbers that were happening earlier?
Sure. I mean, that's the story that's in the book. The market became flooded and the prices kept dropping and dropping. It was supply and demand. Because Trademark Equality was wholesaling their records for about $3. And then by the time you get to like 1974, they're wholesaling for $1.25.
Right.
And then when you have the Fed snooping around, it's they weren't making much money, and they were getting pressured. They didn't want to lose what they had gained. It's like going to Vegas, and you know when to fold.
Yeah. 100%. So when the artwork started getting more sophisticated, I believe William Stout, the artwork of William Stout and other folks got involved. Was that a bit of a marketing tactic to get some additional attention and to stick out amongst the others?
It was. Pigman told us it was about differentiating the TMoQ albums from the other bootleggers. He was always trying to think up ways to make the Trademark Equality albums unique, like the pig stickers. He came up with new pig stickers, and then he came up with, putting inserts in the back, and then he came up with record labels. And then when Hans discovered William Stout and let him do the Winter Tour album of the Rolling Stones, when they did the Nicaragua benefit concert, it was a new way to create a new kind of packaging that the other bootleggers couldn't duplicate. And then as time went on, Stout started doing more and more covers for Trademark Equality. Yeah, his covers really revolutionized. What was funny, this is kind of a side note, is when the feds would go in stores, they would look for covers with rubber stamps on them or pig stickers. And when they saw one that was like a real album cover, they didn't even know if it was a bootleg or not. They didn't pay any attention to those. They were only looking for stamps with rubber stamp or covers with rubber stamps on them.
Plain white cover. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, they were, Trademark Equality was protecting itself by having real album covers.
And the record industry was probably confusing them with, Frank Zappa live at Fillmore East and Who live at Leeds now looking like the stamped covers.
Sure, exactly. The feds probably confiscated some of those thinking they were bootlegs, probably. Especially the Who live at Leeds. I wouldn't be surprised.
Now, the vinyl pressing plants, I understand that a lot of the early TMoQ releases had variations like different colors, maybe like a splatter or combined colors. Was that pretty common for TMoQ?
Well, it became, once they found a good pressing plant, it was down near LA International Airport. They offered them to do colored vinyl, and then they started playing around with it. And the good thing about colored vinyl is when you see a colored vinyl disc, you can see it's pure virgin vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
Black records, the reason records are black is it's to cover up. It's a black PVC, that the material that you make records out of is actually clear.
Mm-hmm.
And they put black dye in it to cover up any imperfections in the pressing. And that was adopted by the record industry many years before, even when they did 78s.
So having the colored pressings was actually a signal that it was a more pure, a better fidelity.
Well, that was part of it, yeah, because Pigman wanted to make higher quality records. He wanted consistent pressings. I mean, they weren't, we're not talking about a Japanese pressing here, but they were trying to do a higher quality pressing than what they were getting before.
Right.
Which, because they were, there were these plants around LA, but you never knew what kind of material they were using in the records.
Did Pigman or anyone from TMoQ participate in the actual mastering of the music? And I mean like the creation of the lacquer and that end of the process?
They found one guy who did that for them. They finally found a guy who actually had a lathe set up in his garage out in Santa Monica. He had a mastering studio in his garage.
Mm-hmm.
And he was mastering all the records for every bootlegger in LA, I think, at the time.
Oh, okay.
He worked for cash. So Pigman would take a tape in and, he'd make a lacquer, and then it would be delivered to the pressing plant.
Okay. So quality was overseen at just
there
about
was
every
no
step.
paperwork for any of this stuff, of course.
Right.
It never happened.
Okay. Now, some of the pressings are of multicolored, very artistic vinyl pressings. Were those, and I'm assuming those are in very limited numbers.
Yeah.
Those are amongst the most valuable. Any idea about the sort of numbers that they would do of those really special vinyl pressings?
Actually, Pigman did a lot of those himself. He would go in the plant and take different colored vinyl and mix it himself and play with it.
Oh, wow.
So if any collectors out there that have some of the original TMoQ pressings, a lot of those were actually pressed by Pigman himself. That's not in the book, by the way.
All right. So that's interesting. So with each pressing with those very unique colors and those sort of things, I'm guessing there's probably 20, 30, just a couple of dozen of those made for each of them?
That, certain titles. Yeah, I would say there's not many of those.
Okay.
Relatively speaking.
And have you kept up with the price of what some of these TMoQ pressings are going for these days?
No, not really. I hear rumors about things going for outrageous prices. Well, that's one of the motivations behind this book is to dispel all the inaccurate information that's online and that stories have built up over the years about this happened and that happened, and which are the real records and which ones aren't, which are the original TMoQ pressings, which are copies.
Mm-hmm.
And then Carl had his trademark equality label, and they call it TMoQ1 and TMoQ2. And what we've done is we actually had a researcher, Steve Talia, who was a genius at tracking down information about the records. And what we've tried to do is create a reference book that can be used by collectors and dealers so that they can authenticate any TMoQ albums that they have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have matrix numbers, we have descriptions of the labels, the jackets, the artwork, everything, so that they can go through their collection and say, oh, look at this. I have a multicolored pressing, or I have one with the square pig sticker on the outside of it. And it will help people authenticate their albums.
In putting together this book, and again, just the amount of information and documentation here is really great, especially for us record nerds.
Oh,
is there anything that you found was missing? What was the most difficult thing, or the thing you had to leave out of the book because that information was just no longer there?
Well, not all the master tapes survived. time. And so we didn't have, for instance, on some what we have in the book, we have what we call information grids. And their documentation on each of the official TMoQ albums. And it gives all the information about the artist, the track list, who plays on it, where it was recorded, and then actual information about the pressing. Mm-hmm. And this is so that you can analyze exactly what you're looking at if you have one of these records. Mm-hmm. And there's so many copies of things like Liver. God knows how many different copies of that were made, by other people. And Great White Wonder, of course.
Yeah, because bootleggers could just bootleg other material. There's no honor amongst the thieves.
And then Blueberry Hill, that's been bootlegged a million times. Mm-hmm. Also.
Now you've got.
So go back to your original question again. I'm sorry, I kind of lost.
Like what is missing? What was the thing that?
What's missing
from the book? Right.
Well, for instance, those tapes. They had total times on the tapes. A lot of those we didn't have the tapes, so that information is missing. Mm-hmm. But our researcher dug up, things we never knew, of course, about each of the albums, and it was kind of like archaeology. We were trying to find out everything we could about each album. Mm-hmm. And there were actually 99 official trademark equality releases. There's 2 EPs, and then you've got 97 LPs, singles and doubles, titles.
Is there any information on the sort of quantities that were made?
No. There's no documentation about that because so much of this was done with cash.
Right.
And that was intentional. There was never, like I say in the book, there isn't a trunk somewhere with all the invoices from the pressing plant saying, there was a pressing of 700 of this title and,
right.
And it was, $300 invoice with a check number. There's nothing like that.
Were all the records made in Southern California, or did you use plants in different parts of the world?
All the trademark equality records were, yes.
Okay.
The original trademark equality were all pressed in the LA area. Yeah.
Okay. Were they all 12-inch records, or did I think I saw
there's two 7-inch what were called maxi EPs, mm-hmm. which were with 3 or 4 songs on them. There was Rolling Stones and a Bad Company, but other than that, they were all 12-inch LPs. Yeah, there was, like I said, there were single and double albums, of course.
Yeah, were those 7-inch records? They were just part of another 12-inch. They were kind of
no. They were as far as I can remember, they were actually tracks unique to those. They were not taken from any of the LPs.
Oh, okay. All right. So they were sold completely separately on their own.
Oh, yeah. Like Cops and Robbers was, it was 3 BBC tracks, but those weren't anywhere else on any of their other albums. Those actually came from that batch of acetates I was talking about earlier.
Any bootleg 8 tracks or tapes or any other format?
No. Everything was vinyl at that time.
Okay. Did you ever hear from people like get word back from band management about, I'll say, commentary or even threats about TMoQ releases?
No. I think Pigman and TMoQ and Carl stayed away, stayed underground. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to talk to those people.
Yeah.
Obviously.
So let's talk about, I guess, the decline, the profitability in that whole model started to subside. The FBI and the authorities were starting to get very close.
Snoop around, yeah.
It seemed like the logical step is to get out before you were pushed. What was the incident that made them truly decide that was the time to cut the rope?
Well, there's one story in there. One of the chapters, it's about the peak and the decline. And one of the things that happened was there was a large shipment sent to Sweden, thousands of records. And the dealer there didn't pick them up at the airport. And it was a COD shipment, and it was a lot of money. And basically, it was a pretty smart scheme, but he could only do it once. He refused to pick up the shipment. So what the airlines would do is they contacted TMQ and said, well, your client didn't pick these up, we'll ship them back to you. And the shipping was a lot of money, air freight from Stockholm to Los Angeles. So it wasn't worth it to ship them back. It's cheaper just to press the records again. Mm-hmm. So TMQ said, just abandon them. Well, what this guy had figured out is that abandoned shipments 6 months later go on auction. So he waited, and it went on auction. And so he got the records for pennies on the dollar, but he can only do that once, of course. Yeah. But I mean, that was a big loss. And then on top of that, as I was saying before, the wholesale had dropped from $3 down to $1.25, because there were so many other people making bootlegs. The market was getting flooded. So I think that, and being burned like that on a shipment to Europe, and then you got feds snooping around, it wasn't fun anymore. I think that's what this is about. It wasn't fun, and the big money had been made, and it was time to fold, as I said before.
Mm-hmm. So one day, Pigman just bundled up everything that was related to the record label, stamps and masters, anything that was around that could have been found that could be incriminating,
right?
And essentially paid some guy to take it away and destroy it.
Yes. And I've heard there are people like on eBay selling rubber stamps, saying that these are the original rubber stamps from the original TMQ albums. And I was told that that's fictitious, that anybody who's selling rubber stamps saying these are original TMQ rubber stamps, they're not. So beware out there. If anybody out there is buying any rubber stamps off eBay, I would be skeptical.
What are the things besides the records that are out there for TMQ? Any sort of relics or items or connections to the operation?
Well, there is an archive with all this stuff in storage, but as far as what's out there would just be whatever records out there that have survived in collections or archives.
What will happen to that archive?
I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe there's some wealthy collector that would like to have it, with some billionaire that wants to buy it have the ultimate TMQ collection. Because there are copies of the records and the tapes, and I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, there's pictures of it. We have highlight pictures in the book. I mean, the people who buy this book will be amazed at the images in this book. I mean, there's pictures of master tapes. There's pictures of the recording studio TMQ built. There's pictures of all the album covers, labels, records. I mean, it's astounding. There's even a picture of the original Pig lead cut that made the original Pig sticker. I mean, Harold and I were astounded when we found out this stuff still existed in this world.
Well, I think what you just described to me, Ralph, is a museum.
Yeah,
some sort of show that that people can actually go in and
see
some of these artifacts.
If the Rock and Roll Museum in Cleveland wants to do an exhibit about the bootleg industry, the stuff exists.
No, you know what you need to do is build a building right next to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that no one knows about.
Right. Yeah, a bootleg Hall of Fame. They would like that.
Yeah. So the legacy of TMQ going forward, like there's all these master tapes. Has there ever been any discussion about, we should really preserve this or make this music available in some other form?
Well, some of those, this is not in the book either. Some of those masters were actually digitally remastered in 2004 for possible release on compact disc, but nothing ever came of it.
Okay.
There were actual prototypes of CDs made in 2004, but nothing ever came of it. So there are digital. part of that was to make digital copies of the masters before they deteriorated. Part of that was an archival effort.
Right. With an eye to potentially distributing them.
Well, maybe, but also to preserve the analog masters.
Right.
Because analog masters do not hold up over time.
Yeah. What role did the oil crisis play in the business of TMoQ?
Well, when that happened, I forgot what year it was, 72, something like that.
Something like that.
Anyway, there was a shortage of polyvinyl chloride, which is PVC, which is what vinyl records are made from, because it's a petroleum product. So they were actually rationing PVC to pressing plants. And during that time, the pressing plants had to tell their customers, we can only press 3,000 records for you till next month, that kind of thing. So there was actual rationing going on with records. And Trademark Equality, of course, was caught up in this. And they were actually looking for old records to grind up into granules to use
Recycle.
to make records. I mean, everybody was doing that.
So did the prices of production go up? Did quantities go down? How did that affect TMoQ?
I don't know about that.
Okay. So in putting together this book, when did it start? And what were some of the challenges in being able to put this book together? It sounds like a lot of people didn't want to talk. Did you get full cooperation along the way?
Pretty much. We got cooperation from people that mattered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were some people involved in this who didn't want to talk to us at all.
And is this something that has been brewing for years and years? How long did it take to pull together this book?
I started work on this about 6 years ago. And I think about 4 years ago, it was offered to a couple of publishers who were involved in books of this nature, and they weren't interested. And then a couple of years ago, Harold got back to me, and he had a book published of his photography. He's a rock photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And he had approached his publisher. He's an old friend, was there when I was in the late 60s, early 70s. And he contacted me and said, I have a book out of my photography, and they might be interested in doing a book on trademark equality. What do you think? And I said, well, funny you mentioned that, because I've been working on this book for a few years. I've been playing around with the idea and writing. Mm-hmm. So we put our heads together, and actually he's the one who got Genius Book Publishing interested in the project.
Okay.
Which I was thrilled about. And, between Harold's knowledge and experience and mine, we put our heads together, and I got a friend of mine, Steve Talia, to do research on the albums, because he's a real music geek and knows his stuff and loves bootlegs. So we brought him in to do research on the albums themselves, to get all the information on each album. And we've been seriously working on this now for 2 years, and the book's finally coming out September 10th next month. Mm-hmm. So we're thrilled to. I'm looking forward to holding a copy in my own hand. It's actually going to press as we speak. It's being pressed this month. Pressed. Yeah, it's not being pressed. It's being printed this month. Printed and bound. And we have sold out of we have a limited signed edition of 300, which is sold out already, pre-orders. Mm-hmm. But we have a commercial version of the book, which will be available September 10th. And it's over 300 pages. And all of you out there who are TMoQ fans or bootleg fans or record collectors, you won't believe it when you see it.
It is gorgeous. I can confirm. I've seen a pre-issue copy. The photography of all the different elements, the actual tapes, the artifacts that are there.
And everything's in color too. We're not dealing with. There's some old black and white photos in there, but all the colored vinyl and the colored album covers and I mean the even the color of the tape boxes, everything's in color. I mean, it just I was so thrilled when the publisher said, "Yeah, we'll do everything in color," and I thought, "Wow, I mean, this book went way beyond anything I ever envisioned.
Well, what do you think? What do you think the legacy is for TMQ?
Well, it's in this book. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, who knows? But I think there's going to be a lot of dealers and collectors that are going to be really happy when they can actually authenticate the records in their collections.
Mm-hmm.
I think it will create a demand for authentic trademark quality albums out there in the world.
That demand is already there, and I can only see it growing stronger.
But it amazes me the amount of information about trademark quality on the internet all over the world. I mean, it's just astounding to me.
What do you think people get wrong most often about trademark quality?
I think there were so many copies because everybody copied the pig logo, and there's so many different incarnations of these albums. And after all these years, I don't think people know what's what.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people have contacted me and said, well, are these genuine TMQ albums? And I'm sorry to say a lot of them aren't. So
were people knocking off TMQ albums even down to a pig sticker?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Not the sticker so much, but a lot of them made paper inserts, which went on the shrink wrap, which had the pig sticker on them. And then, of course, it's in the book, Carl and Pigman went their separate ways, and Carl was using the same stampers from the TMQs. They were sharing stampers and things. So there's a lot of Carl TMQ records too. And actually TMQ trademark quality were distributing his trademark quality stuff. It's kind of complicated. But the book concentrates on the Pigman's original trademark quality label and the official titles that they either produced or got the rights to or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So
in the trademark quality records, was there much information in the runout groove?
You mean like on Sgt. Pepper or something?
Well, no, things like a lot of times we'd get a record, you look in the runout groove and you could tell whether it's where the pressing came from or any sort of information, or even a few numbers that would reference.
Just a matrix number
right.
would be on there. And there's plate numbers. I mean, all that is documented on the information sheets in the book on each album. Anything that was found from an original pressing is in there. So people will be able to get a magnifying glass and look at their records and say, oh, look, I've got this matrix number written on my records. So this must
they'll be able to verify. They'll cross-reference and say like, oh, this is a legitimate TMoQ. Or, okay.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of information in this book is astounding. I mean, it buried us, trying to collect this together, making sure it was correct.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really delayed the book because we were trying to get everything right and make sure we got everything in there we could. The book originally was supposed to come out last year, but because of the pandemic and getting, everything got delayed, which I think worked in our favor because it gave us more time to make sure everything was right.
Mm-hmm. Back in the day, were bootlegs played on the radio that much?
Oh, yeah. In the early days, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
some of the college stations would play them, sure.
Okay. And they would comment that it is a bootleg, or would they even give recommendations on where to get them?
I don't know about that, but they were playing them. Well, there's one funny story in there. Pigman was in Hollywood one night driving in Hollywood, listening to the radio, and this DJ on one of the commercial stations says, "That's a new track from Dylan's new album. It's called Stealin'." And that's what it is, folks. It was stolen. He told us that story.
So some of the, I'll say, legitimate media would pick up on this. Interviews and reviews in Rolling Stone, newspapers.
Oh, yeah. Well, Rolling Stone is the one who broke the story in September 1969. They were... Jerry Hopkins interviewed Pigman and Merlin, who was their frontman, which if you read the book, you'll find out who Merlin is.
So, Ralph, again, thanks to you and Harold for pulling together this book. It is absolutely wonderful. A Pig's Tale, The Underground Story of the Legendary Bootleg Record Label, Trademark of Quality. It's an absolute must for record fanatics and music nerds. It's a great story. It's got beautiful pictures and lots of very interesting historical facts to salivate over. People can check it out at TMoQ, apigstail.com. You could also just Google A Pig's Tale, and by tail, T-A-L-E. Find a copy of this book. Grab a copy. You will not be disappointed. It is absolutely gorgeous and a very authoritative tome on this extremely important record label. Again, a great book. A Pig's Tale, Underground Story of the Legendary Bootleg Record Label, Trademark of Quality. TMoQ, apigstail.com. And Ralph, thanks again for joining us here on the show.
Thank you.
Well, there we go. Thanks, Ralph and Harold, for joining us here on the Vinyl Guide. And I got to tell everyone, we just hit the tops of the waves. This book is fascinating. I've read it twice, and I'm about to go in for a third time. A Pig's Tale, the underground story of the legendary Bootleg record label, Trademark of Quality. Google it up. You can go to tmqapigstail.com. Check everywhere that books are sold, but grab a copy because it is wonderful. And that's it for this episode of the Vinyl Guide. Number 299 is in the bag, and we're approaching number 300. So thank you for joining us on this journey. Please follow and subscribe to us on your podcast app so you are made aware immediately when a new episode comes available. Please share on your social media and tell your friends, and even show them how to use that podcast app on their smartphone. Not everyone knows how to do that, so if you can jump in there and be a bit of tech support for us, that is much appreciated. We'll be back shortly with a brand new episode, so until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.